I feel like I should release the band. Are y'all gonna make faces? Okay, all right. I want to be self-conscious. All right. Good morning. I remember years ago when I lived in Los Angeles. By the way, I've probably told you this before, but I'm a little spoiled. My first spiritual teacher was Louise Hay, and she was actually my second mom, because I was in a trio back in the 80s called Alliance, and we actually formed because Louise was wanting music to go with her message, and she wanted something original, and I happened to be there at that time and space and to be able to take full advantage of that. So you kind of can imagine that I grew up fundamentalist Christian Pentecostal, praise God, hallelujah. And as soon as I could get out of there, I did. And I kind of made this little notation in myself that I never wanted to have anything to do with God ever again. Funny how that happens. And then I wind back up in Los Angeles and Louise, and I am introduced into this world of new thought, and I think it's one of the most beautiful immersions because it was a full-blown immersion. And I got to be with her, observe her, learn from her, and her spirit continues to carry on inside of me. And I hope she's proud. I think she is. And I know that as far back as when I began to listen to Louise, that there's a commonality that we all share. And the Course in Miracles used to say that there's only two things ever going on, love or fear. And I kind of took that and I thought, well, there's also two things going on, and that's remembering and forgetting. And I don't know about you, but my aim has always been, what will help me remember more than I forget? And so in those times when I forget, can I develop some real, sincere self-compassion and migrate myself or pivot myself back to anything that will help me remember? And I can imagine that you're in the same boat with me, and that's still the duality, that's still the dance today. So you can fill this blank in. I can't see the forest for the trees. I never really paid much attention to that little homily, but I had this idea, and I want you to go with, you ready to do a little live action experiment? Take your hand, put your hand over your eyes, don't peek, completely block your vision, and keep it there while I talk a little bit. So what you see before you is darkness, and yet there's a part of you that knows that if you were to take your hand down, that there's something beyond that. You would know that there's a stage here. You would even know that beyond this physical building, there's a city, there's all kinds of activity going on. But for right now, with your hand up still, that's like a tree. And the tree represents our illnesses, our family dramas, our greatest fears, our wounds, all of the things that percolate and stir within us when we're all sharing this human experience. And it can be very seductive sometimes to think that the only thing before us is that tree. And yet, what is it within you that knows that there is something beyond that? It's an experience. And so that darkness that you see right now, that metaphoric tree, is all of the things that play the role in our collective forgetfulness. Okay, you can bring your hand down now. See, there were things beyond that, right? And what's beyond that, then, we will call the forest. And I've decided that what we really get to focus on is, how do I become a better forest person than a tree person? And you know what I mean by that? So tree people, what do we usually talk about? Trees. All of the issues and problems. I remember leading these classes when I was a Science of Mind minister, and we had this assignment once where I split everybody up in these dyads, and for 5 minutes, all that they could talk about was what was working. And I said, if you struggle with that, get really basic. I have a toothbrush. I have tires on my car. And what was so amazing about that simple little exercise was that by the time the 5 minutes had taken place, by the end of it, almost 100% of the sharing from the people would be something like, I forgot how many things were working. I was so focused on this myopic tree that I keep doing battle with on a daily basis that I forgot that there are these solutions. I like to say solution already exists. So, what helps us be better forest people? What helps you be a better forest person? Because this unity, these principles, any new thought is built upon a principle, one really big principle, and that is what? The only reality is God. So when I am remembering, when I am in my full embodied forest mentality, that principle makes sense to me. I'm in agreement with it. I like it. It feels good. The only reality is God. It causes me to go into this kind of energy of beyond, looking beyond appearances. I would often teach students and people that I would say, even in the apparent absence of. And so even in the apparent absence of love, there is love. Even in the apparent absence of peace, there is peace. Even in the apparent absence of reconciliation, there is this beautiful symbiotic reconciling that takes place. And that's what a forest person must depend upon. And I have this feeling that you're here because there's more of you that wants to cultivate and create an environment that's conducive to being a forest person than it is to being someone who has become stagnant and stuck in just being a tree person. Right? How do we do that? How do we get there? It is a moment by moment, day by day choice where instead of getting so locked in with the difficulty of what represents our tree right now, that becomes the golden ticket, that becomes the golden moment. And as your beloved Reverend Richard was sharing, it's been 21 years ago since the beginning of this year, that I first landed in Cambodia. And let me tell you a little bit about how that happened. So I was a singer. We had cultivated kind of a good-sized email list when email lists really had some juice to them. And another fellow musician had said, David, you can capitalize on that list and work with these tour companies, and you could go to all these sacred sites. And if you get a certain number of people to go, you get to go free. And I was like, what? How does that work? And ever since I had been a little boy, growing up in this impoverished environment, I had wanted to see the world. And I never knew how that would be possible. And I'll never forget the first time that I tried that. And 45 people signed up to go with me to China. And I was climbing the Great Wall, and I was like, how did this happen? But that's kind of indicative of a forest mentality is, I don't know how that's going to work, but I'm going to take whatever the necessary steps are because I know that there are these opportunities that exist, right? And on and on and on, I started using this system, and little old David from Beaumont, Texas, who came from nothing, is suddenly having these really fabulous adventures. And all during that time period, I was kind of honing my people skills and my collective consciousness, where you look at who needs to go to the bathroom and who's ready to know. You kind of direct, and you can direct people, and you become a really good tour guide. And so I'm really in my element. And then I am presented an opportunity to go to Thailand and Cambodia. I didn't know much about that part of the area of the world. But I did know that in Cambodia, there was an ancient wonder. And I think some of you in this room have been there. It's called Angkor Wat. It's like the largest spiritual temple complex in the world. And it's been the one saving grace that has lifted that country from just caving in on itself after a massive civil war in the 1970s. If you're a cinema buff, you've probably seen the movie The Killing Fields, which is where this dictatorship came in, took over 2 million Cambodians, marched them into the rice fields, and worked them until they fell dead. It's one of the great genocides that has ever taken place, one of the great horrors of our human existence. And so when I got there in 2004, it had only been 30 years since that had happened. And the only thing that had any kind of substance or breath of survival within that country was tourism, people coming to see Angkor Wat. And I had my little group of about 12, and we were showing up just like all these other groups had done previous and continue to do today. But for those people in the group, it was the first time that they had ever seen the delineation between the haves and the have-nots. The haves were us, the tourists. The have-nots were the local people. And it was very difficult. It's very abrupt. I'm sure many of you have traveled in developing countries before or probably been a part of organizations who work in these types of environments. And for these folks, there is a natural empathetic response to want to do something. And I'm so glad that back then I was naive. I'm naive to all of some of the restrictions that have grown over the years about you don't do that because it's not sustainable, blah, blah, blah. I'm glad I didn't know any of that. And all the people are like, let's do something. And I'm like, yeah. And I go to our guide and I go, I have 12 people who want to do something. And I realize it's not sustainable. They call it a one-off. I realize it's a one-off. However, why not maximize that? Why dismiss that if these people are eager to do something? And he looked at me and I looked at him and I said, I tell you what, take us to the worst place possible. Then he really looked at me like, who is this strange American? And so we had to talk about it. And he finally said, there is the largest waterway in this part of Asia right here. It's called the Tonle Sap Lake. And in the dry season, when the water recedes, all of the landmine victims, the transient villagers, the refugees, all the worst of the worst congregate there. And they create this sort of organic community until the rains start again and they disperse. So I said landmine victims. You remember Princess Diana? So right before she passed away, the big initiative that she was working on was to excavate all of the hundreds of thousands of landmines that were still buried all across the country from that particular civil war. And those landmines, most of them towards the end, were made out of this sort of recycled plastic. And you can imagine 30 years of erosion, and you get these little fragments of plastic sticking up. They're teaching them recycling, so a child or a farmer sees that, goes to pick it up, and then it blows their limbs off. And you have all of these people now without any means of any kind of economic survival. All this stuff is on display. So he said, let's go to the Tonle Sap Lake. Let's take food because there's a ton of children there. They too have congregated there, many of them without families, and they're hungry, so feed them. And I said, feed them what? And that became a discussion because you can't just show up in those environments and bring anything. Now you got to find food that's going to be agreeable, indigenous to their digestive systems. Now you're going to have to go to the local markets. And all of these things are working out, and everyone in the group is still game. And we finally settle on going to an area where local markets are happening. And we're all in on that. And I said, everybody's in agreement? Yes, we're all in agreement. So we end up purchasing 3 local markets worth of food. Those are those big side-by-side collectives where they have all of this stuff out. And we just keep going, yeah. And I have not even thought about how I'm going to pay for all of this. I'm just like, yeah. It means, too, that we have to now order a fleet of vans to pack it all in. Still haven't thought about that. I'm just saying, yeah. I'm being a forest person. Yeah. And when it is time to pay, that little part of me, David, from Southeast Texas that came from nothing, kind of took a big gulp, and I said, how much? And the tour guide is negotiating with all of the vendor leaders, and finally he comes up to me, and I'm like, and he goes, $86. And I just stood there. And I remember looking at my feet in this dirt, and I thought, how in the world did I get here? Even me, this little impoverished kid from Southeast Texas, I can do this. And the thing that got me there was not just this kind of plopping in. It was a collection of forest moments of being willing to lift myself out of any kind of excuse or stagnation or routine or ideology or inner theme that told me it's too hard or it's too this or it's too that. It was just like, yes. And so we paid that money. Everybody pulled their money, and we paid for that. And we're all a little shell-shocked that that's all that it cost. And then he said, oh dear, I need to get a message to the matriarch of that village. So even a transient village has a matriarch. This was in 2004. There were cell phones, but not like today. And I still don't know how he did it, but somehow he got a message to the matriarch of that transient village so that by the time all of the vans were loaded and we made our way there, it's like 45-minute drive, we pull up and there are hundreds of kids sitting in the dry cake bed waiting. And we pull up and we start to unload, and it was so silent. Even in the anticipation of, what is this? It was just this silence. And for about 7 minutes, it was the most beautiful simpatico communion of taking things and passing it on. And then, off in the distance, whether it was the smells or intuition, hundreds more start running, charging after us, and all heaven broke loose. Do you see what I just did there? All heaven broke loose. And before you know it, there is this whirlwind, this cacophony of yelling and grabbing and pleading. I remember like some kids who could barely be older than 7 years old, holding a younger sibling, trying to get food for them as well. And this sort of just feed fest until it was all done. It was all gone. And we stood there kind of like after the storm has lifted. And this one woman, I do not know what possessed her to wear a white skirt that day. But when she looked down, her entire skirt was covered with little mud handprints where children had been grabbing. And she looked down and she went, oh my God. And she said, this is the canvas of humanity. I'll never wash this. And then she burst into tears. And tears are kind of like yawning. Like when somebody starts to yawn, then everybody else starts to yawn. Even my saying that word, you're already yawning. And so, of course, by her, and it was this kind of really, vocal weeping then this person and this person and this person. And I'm David, I'm tour leader. I must not cry. I must not cry. I must hold it together. And I'm having this internal battle until all of a sudden, nothing like this has ever happened to me before or since. There is this knowing that something is about to explode inside of me. And there's no control of self that's going to stop this. And I'm frantically looking for some place to excuse myself. And all that there is on the smelly Tonle Sap Lake is a pontoon boat. And I crawl to that boat on my hands and knees. I get as far into the boat, into the water as possible. And I'm on all fours and I just start to wail. And here's the strange thing. It was not out of pity. It was in full conscious awareness. It was like a purging, like a global or a humanistic purging. And I was them and they were me. I was the little boy who was also starving and hungry, and they were me. And all of this, call it a mystical awareness, whatever it was so intense that it felt like my physical heart burst. At that same time, I was traveling, flying a lot, and one of those flights, right before this trip, I was reading a airline magazine. Remember when they had airline magazines? I'm reading this airline magazine, and there's this really beautiful spiritual article. And in it, the author said, the most powerful mantra that you can ever say is, I'm available. And I went, oh, that's sweet. And then it said, look out. I went, because it said, if you mean it, your whole world will change. And in that pontoon boat, on my hands and knees, that article was the only thing that appeared in my mind. And I just kept going, I'm available, I'm available, I'm available, I'm available. Which to me is kind of like the mantra of a forest person. And 21 years later, we have 2 campuses that teach English and math and fine arts program and technology and sanitation and hygiene. We've gone into the villages. We've migrated over to India, and we have built 2 schools there. When the pilot program in India started in 2016, they were completely illiterate in the slums that we work in. Just this past January, and there are beautiful people in this room who were there with me, they put on an exhibition, a science fair, spoke articulate English, and their literacy skill completely went from 0 to blowing my mind in the last 6 to 7 years. Partnering in Guatemala, feeding children in Africa, and yes, focusing on all of the after-school programs that are being cut in our own country.